Welcome again to the Brand Ambassador Series. We're staying in the US, of course. Look at him. Four Roses. Absolutely wonderful Al Young. Thanks for being here.
That's great to be here.
Well, you'd better be talking bourbon. But not just bourbon. Four Roses Bourbon. Go ahead.
Well, you know, it's really easy to talk about Four Roses Bourbon from the standpoint that we do things that other people can't do with bourbons.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we have 5 different yeasts. We have 2 mash bills, which, you know, no matter what anybody tries to do, they can't duplicate. One of the other things that makes us unique is we have one-floor warehouses. And the one-floor warehouses provide more even aging and provide us with some delectable barrels that show up in all of our regular products as well as some of our special editions.
Oh, well, so let's take it back. You said 5 different yeast strains.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, why is that?
Well, when we divested ourselves of Seagrams, when they went out of business in the year 2000, we selected 5 strains of yeast out of their library to use to give us greater versatility in making the bourbons that we do produce.
Okay. So you've got those 5 yeast strains.
Yes.
They each have a different profile.
They range all the way from slightly fruity to spicy to slightly floral to minty, all kinds of combinations there.
How do you keep those strains from producing always the same aromas and flavors?
It's not easy, and I'll tell you why. Because yeast will mutate over time,
Right.
and when it does, it's very hard to bring it back. But we keep all of our yeast strains fresh by having off-site slants. And those off-site slants, rather, help us to bring back the original culture every time we go.
Okay. But still, there must be taking some time and energy and paying a lab and all of this.
We think the results are worth it,
Oh,
frankly.
it's absolutely beautiful. But it also must be complicating the task of leading the fermentation. Is it that you've got a season for this yeast and then you move on to another yeast on the following month, or how do you?
Actually, these yeasts are hardy enough that they don't do a special season. They can be done anytime during our manufacturing time. That usually comes up between September and the end of April right now.
Okay.
So we'll run so many days of one, so many days of another, and till we can get everything that we need according to our manufacturing program.
And this you apply to different mash bills.
We have the 2 different mash bills. One's 60% corn, 35% rye, 5% malt. The other one is 75% corn, 20% rye, and 5% malt. Actually, we use more rye than anybody in the business. Some of the other bourbon producers use only 10 to 12%.
Right.
So we think it's that robust rye quality that gives our whiskey its spiciness and tartness. Makes it an outstanding bourbon.
I believe it does. And yet, if I try to remember, there was that yellow label of Four Roses back in the days that you couldn't really find everywhere, or that wasn't really the greatest bourbon or whiskey. What was it and what's now? Because there was a switch. You've got to talk about this.
Well, I'll be glad to, because next year is our 125th anniversary of the brand. So up until about 1945, the whiskey was a straight whiskey, a straight bourbon. And then it was taken over by the Seagram Company, actually in 1941, I believe it was. And when they did, they took, 1943, they took it over, and they made plans to turn it into a blended whiskey in the United States because they knew how to do that. And since the Frankfurt Distilling Company owned it before then and had been selling it overseas as an export item, they decided they would have good luck with just selling the bourbon overseas as an export item. So they did. So in the United States, we had the blended whiskey version.
Right.
Overseas, we had the bourbon version. And over time, the chemical, or not the chemical, actually, it's the whiskey makeup of the blended version, changed under Seagram to the point where it became a lower level blended whiskey. And then the American people as well lost love with blended products from the 1940s to the late 50s, early 60s, and they put it on the bottom shelf. So consequently, the brand was in disfavor for a long time in the U.S. Well, it was really going great guns overseas.
And then?
Now, it's all 100% Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, and the blended whiskey is no longer made. Of course, this came about after we were purchased by the Kirin Brewing Company from Japan.
Right. See how many of the other bourbon producers say, we can go to floor number 3 and we can go to floor number 7 and we can get very, very different barrels coming from the same cooperage, but the whiskey will be very different. You're saying that you have one-story warehouses. Therefore, you cannot do this. You don't have that great variety of bourbons.
Who says so? Frankly, what it is simply there's 35 different degrees of difference between the bottom floor and the top floor in a traditional Kentucky bourbon warehouse. In our warehouse, there's as much as 7 degrees difference. So that means that you're going to have more even maturation, hence more availability of ready whiskey in a shorter period of time. Although, like I said earlier, in the center, you're going to have more prolonged aging to build up those flavors and aromas, those things that we call congeners.
Therefore, is it because of the airflow? Is it because of it's a different humidity? What is it?
We have more even effects of the outside temperature and conditions on our warehouses that you don't have in the 6th floor warehouses. See, we don't ordinarily, well, we don't, it's not a question of ordinarily, we don't artificially heat or cool those warehouses.
Okay.
It's all ambient temperature from outside.
But if they're one-story warehouses, you must have so many more. You must own a lot of land. You must...
Well, we have about 20 warehouses, and each one will hold 24,000 barrels of aging bourbon.
Well, that's still quite a few barrels per warehouse. So
Absolutely.
Do you stack them, even if it's on one floor? Do you stack them? And
they're stacked on ricks, actually, on these 6 different levels. Across the warehouse.
So you can pick if you really want special barrels. I'm just thinking, what about that single barrel of yours? How do you decide that these few barrels will be sold individually?
Well, this comes about as a result of something that happened back in 2004. Our master distiller, Jim Rutledge, decided that it was time for Four Roses to make a single barrel. So he sat down and culled through a number of whiskeys and finally came up with this particular formula, which is the high rye mash bill with a slightly fruity or fruity yeast. So we call it on the bottle OBSV. Now that will never change. That will always be the same.
Okay.
Just like the small batch will always be a combination of the high rye and the high corn mash bills with the K and the O yeast, K being spicy, O being slightly fruity.
So if I love that small batch, what does it say about me?
It says that you're discerning for flavors. It says that you enjoy a good Manhattan on occasion, which will decrease the amount of vermouth you have to use in it without losing the effect of the Four Roses small batch whiskey.
All right. Well, it's nice to know more about yourself when drinking.
Absolutely.
Sipping.
Yeah, sipping. Oh, by the way, I don't know if we said something about this earlier, but the yellow label is 80 proof, the small batch is 90, and the single barrel is 100. And
100 is where it should be. It's not too high. It's not going to be giving a bit too much of a bite.
Well, you know, that was where the proof was during Prohibition. That was the acknowledged standard, that you had to make whiskeys that were 100 proof, so that you were dealing with a real McCoy.
You mentioned the fact that you're distilling between September and May.
Between September and early May.
Okay.
Yes.
Would you just go on vacation then?
We do a summer shutdown, and I'll tell you the truth, it really is needed because the equipment and so forth in the distillery takes one terrific pounding during the manufacturing season.
Okay.
So we have to go down and do some necessary repairs. It also allows us to get some of those barrels out of the warehouse so that when we start running out again in September, we can fill it back up again.
Right. Those barrels,
Yeah.
are you using the same barrels as everybody else? What's specific to Four Roses when it comes to the wood, to the aging policy?
Well, you know, all distilleries have their own favorite cooperage, but ours is the Independent Stave Company in Lebanon, Kentucky. They also have a plant in Lebanon, Missouri. So they're the main provider of our white oak barrels that are charred on the inside. It's a medium char.
So how many seconds is that?
Well, it's about a full minute of a rapid fire that gets hit inside the barrel as well as the barrel heads themselves.
Okay. Do you think this has a great influence on the final character?
There's no doubt in my mind that the barrel plays a great part in what the final product is. In fact, maybe 60 to 65% of the whole thing depends on that barrel.
And yet, something is telling me that you've got different barrels sitting around here and there with a different char level, and you've been playing with barrels without telling us.
Well, we have, and we've tried different entry proofs. We put ours in at 120, but we've tried some at 110, 115, but that was a long time ago.
Okay.
And now we're pretty much standardized on 120 in terms of proof going in the barrel.
So right off the distillation, you bring it down.
Not
with a bit
really.
of water, or is it just as it is?
When it comes off the beer still, it's 132 proof. When it comes out of the doubler, it's 140.
Okay.
And we think that's where our whiskey does its best demonstration of what it can do.
Okay.
Character-wise, everything. Then when they take it down to Cox's Creek, after it's been approved, but only after it's been approved, then they'll cut it with reverse osmosis water down there to 120 proof and put it in the barrel.
All right. And then it stays in the barrel. And it stays.
And it stays.
But what do you mean? At some point you've got to use it up and
We have an age that we're looking for all of those barrels actually. And they're periodically sampled at 6 month intervals to see what's going on. And as soon as the barrel's ready, or as soon as we think the whiskey is ready, then we'll determine whether it'll go into the yellow, the small batch, or the single barrel, depending again on the yeast and the mash bill.
So if I take the small batch, can I say that this is 5-year-old or
I want to tell you
6-year-old,
it's between 6 and 8 right now.
Okay. But it can vary depending on the outcome of that.
Well, you know,
tasting.
you're doing 4 different whiskeys here because it's those 2 yeasts, one at a time with each mash bill. So you've got 4 whiskeys involved there, all right? So, but I'm not going to try to tell you that each one's in there for 25%. Again, it's all a question of taste and flavor profile, and it has to match up exactly like the standard. And if there is a change, it'll be so slight that the average person wouldn't even notice it.